Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that every challenge in your life, every obstacle, every setback, every complicated decision could be turned into an opportunity. Not because the world magically changed, but because you did. Because you learned how to think strategically. Now, before we dive in, let me warn you, once you understand this skill, you'll start noticing things others miss. You'll begin anticipating problems before they happen. And yes, you might even catch yourself smiling when life throws a curveball, because instead of panicking, you'll know exactly what to do next. Today, I'm breaking down the art of strategic thinking, and by the end of this audiobook-style video, you'll understand how to outsmart almost any challenge that comes your way. Before we dive into tactics, tools, logic frameworks, or any of the flashy concepts people love to throw around when they talk about strategy, I want to take you to the absolute core, the foundation, the place where every genuinely strategic person begins. Not with their skills, not with their experience, not with their knowledge, but with something far more important. A mindset engineered for clarity under pressure, because without that, everything else collapses. Let me paint the picture for you. When you think about the greatest strategists in history, chess masters, military generals, world-class entrepreneurs, elite negotiators, you'll notice something interesting. They're not the ones who talk the loudest. They're not the ones who move the fastest. And they're definitely not the ones who crumble the moment something unexpected happens. They have a very specific energy about them. Calm, controlled, intentional. They can stand inside chaos and still think clearly. And that isn't an accident. That isn't genetics. It's not even raw intelligence. It's mindset. A mindset built, developed, trained, and strengthened over time. But before you start thinking, well, maybe they're just superhuman, let me give you a dose of truth that most self-help books won't say out loud. Your brain is not naturally wired for strategic thinking, not even close. And I want you to let that sink in for a moment, because we tend to assume that if we're not naturally strategic, it must mean we're flawed or slow or not smart enough to think like the leaders we admire. But that's not the case at all. Your brain isn't wired for strategy, it's wired for survival. Meaning, it doesn't want long-term planning, it doesn't want complexity. It doesn't want to zoom out, analyze patterns, and think 10 steps ahead. No, the brain wants one thing: comfort. It wants quick answers, immediate relief, fast solutions, emotional safety, and predictable outcomes. That might have worked back in the caveman days, but today, that instinct usually works against you. This is exactly why, when something stressful happens, your brain throws you into panic mode. Your heart beats a little faster. Your mind starts racing. You jump straight into fix it now, fix it now, fix it now mode, even if the thing you're about to fix isn't actually the real problem. Let me give you a reality check with a pattern interrupt. You ever notice that when a friend comes to you for advice, you suddenly become a genius? You see the problem clearly, you know what they should do. You can break the whole situation down like you've been studying it for years. You're smooth, you're logical, you're calm, almost like you should be charging by the hour. But the moment you face your own problems, your IQ drops so fast you can practically hear it hitting the floor. Now you're confused, anxious, overwhelmed, making emotional decisions that you'd never let your friend make. And it's not because you're dumb. You're not. It's because your survival instincts take over the moment your own comfort or security feels threatened. Strategy requires distance. Survival instincts eliminate distance. This is why strategic thinking isn't about how smart you are, it's about how disciplined your mind is under pressure. Let me repeat that, because this entire chapter revolves around it. Strategic thinking is not intelligence. It is discipline. You train it, you build it, you sharpen it, and you strengthen it the same way you strengthen a muscle, through repeated exposure to controlled pressure. And the more you practice strategic thinking, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, your brain learns something powerful. Not every threat is a threat. Not every problem is urgent. Not every challenge requires immediate action. Sometimes the smartest move is to wait. Sometimes it's to observe. Sometimes it's to analyze. And sometimes it's to do absolutely nothing yet. Now, let's slow down for a second, because I want to walk you through what this mindset looks like in real life. Most people wake up every day and immediately fall into reaction mode. They check their phones, read messages, scroll through social media, let notifications decide their priorities, and be Before they even get out of bed, their brain is already responding to whatever randomness the world throws at them. A strategist does not start the day this way. A strategist begins with intention. They step back before they step in. They ask, what matters today? What's noise? What signal? What deserves my attention? What doesn't? And this is a subtle but critical shift, because strategy doesn't begin in the moment of crisis. It begins long before the crisis appears. Let me give you an example. Imagine two people facing the exact same problem, losing their job. Person A panics. They immediately think, oh no, what am I going to do? How will I pay my bills? Everything is falling apart. They start reacting emotionally, making rushed decisions, calling everyone they know, searching for any job that pops up, sending out resumes at random, spiraling into anxiety. That's survival mode. Person B? They take a breath. They assess the situation. They identify what they can control. They review the skills they have. They think about their long-term direction. They strategize their next 3 moves, not just their next one. Who do you think lands a better opportunity? Who do you think grows from the challenge instead of breaking from it? The one with the strategic mindset. Because survival mode sees danger, strategic mode sees possibility. Let's break that down even further. When your brain is in survival mode, you're not thinking clearly, you're thinking emotionally, and emotional thinking is often dramatic, exaggerated, and catastrophic. You start imagining worst-case scenarios. You assume threats that may not exist. You start convincing yourself that your entire life is about to collapse. And the reason this happens is simple. Your brain thinks fear keeps you safe. It's trying to protect you. It just doesn't realize it's overprotecting you. But a strategist learns to override that built-in panic system. They learn to pause. They learn to breathe. They learn to look at the full landscape and not just the scariest part of it. And here's something you will appreciate. The strategist mindset is less about thinking faster and more about thinking slower. Strategists slow down when everyone else speeds up. They process before they act. They see the entire board, not just the piece in front of them. When you slow down, you begin to see patterns. You notice details others overlook. You spot opportunities hidden in the chaos. You anticipate moves before they happen. And that is the advantage. Let me give you another pattern interrupt here. You ever watch someone freak out in a situation where you're thinking, relax, it's not even that serious? Maybe a coworker panics about a small mistake, or a friend gets emotional about something minor, or someone at a store is losing their mind over the wrong price tag. You're calm because your survival instincts aren't triggered. The problem doesn't threaten you, so you can see it logically. That is what a strategic mindset feels like in your own life, when you learn to detach enough that your emotions stop drowning your logic. But here's the part that most people never understand. Strategic thinkers aren't emotionless. They just don't let emotions drive the car. A strategist uses emotion as information, not as instruction. Fear tells them where the risk might be. Anger tells them someone crossed a boundary. Stress tells them something needs attention. Anxiety tells them there's uncertainty they haven't examined. But none of these emotions decide the next move. The strategist does. Now I want to take you deeper into how this mindset actually forms. The first step is awareness. You need to catch yourself in survival mode. Most people never do. They don't even realize they're thinking from a place of fear, urgency, or insecurity. They confuse emotional urgency for actual importance. They confuse discomfort for danger. They confuse uncertainty for failure. But once you learn to recognize survival mode, you can interrupt it. And that's when strategic thinking begins. For example, the next time you feel overwhelmed, I want you to stop and say out loud, "Hold on, this is my survival brain talking." And then breathe. Give yourself 1 minute. Let the fog settle. Because strategic thinking requires clarity, and clarity cannot exist in panic. The second step is distance. Strategists learn to mentally step outside of the moment. They observe themselves. They look at their situation the way an outsider would. This is why giving advice to others feels easy. You're emotionally distanced. You can train yourself to do the same with your own problems. The next time you're stressed, ask yourself, if someone else came to me with this exact problem, what would I tell them? You'll be surprised how quickly the clarity appears. Now, here's another pattern interrupt for you. If you've ever walked into your kitchen, stared at the sink full of dishes, and suddenly felt like your entire life is falling apart, that's not the dishes. That's your survival brain taking something small and blowing it up to symbolize everything else you're stressed about. Strategic thinkers don't fall for that trick. They recognize when the brain is doing its dramatic storytelling routine, and they shut it down. The third step of the strategist mindset is perspective. Strategists zoom out. They see the larger picture. They see how this moment fits into the entire timeline of their life. Your brain, however, has the attention span of a toddler when it's stressed. It sees only the immediate moment. It doesn't care about next week or next month or next year. It cares about right now. Strategic thinking forces the brain to expand the timeline. This is where one of the most powerful questions comes in, a question we'll dive deeper into in the next chapter. What would my future self want me to do right now? This question alone can dissolve panic. It pulls you out of the moment and forces your brain to consider the long-term consequences of your actions. But that's coming in chapter 3, so hold that thought. Before we move on, I want to leave you with this. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they never learn to manage their mind. Their emotions control them. Their fears control them. Their impulses control them. Their ego controls them. Their comfort zone controls them. A strategist refuses to hand over control. They choose clarity over panic. They choose patience over urgency. They choose perspective over emotion. They choose discipline over instinct. And that is the mind of a strategist. Now, I know what you're wondering. If this is the mindset, how do I start building it? Good question, and that's exactly where we're heading next. But before we go to the next chapter, I'll leave you with one final cliffhanger. There's a powerful shift, a single mental framework that can help you rewire your thinking almost instantly. Most people never learn it, some never even hear about it, but you're about to. And once you do, you'll never approach a challenge the same way again. Every challenge you face, whether it's financial pressure, relationship conflict, career uncertainty, personal goals, or unpredictable life events, has a battlefield. But here's the mistake nearly everyone makes. They step onto that battlefield blindfolded. They react without understanding. They fight without direction. They move without clarity. They start solving problems they don't even fully understand. And here's the part I need you to really hear. Strategists don't do that. Ever. Strategists don't rush into the fire. They pause, they assess, they define, they frame. Before they fight, they frame the battlefield. Because if you can't define the problem accurately, you can't solve it intelligently. This is the part that separates people who struggle from people who dominate. It's not strength, it's not resources, it's not talent, it's clarity. Clarity is the ultimate strategic advantage. And ironically, clarity is the one thing your brain absolutely hates. Your brain doesn't want clarity. It wants fast answers. Why? Because fast answers make you feel safe. Your brain loves the illusion of certainty, even if the conclusion you jump to is wrong. That's why people reach for the nearest solution, the easiest explanation, the simplest story that makes them feel like they understand what's happening. But strategic thinkers don't chase fast answers. They chase truth. And truth requires framing. Let me share a simple truth that took me way too long to learn, and once I finally understood it, everything in my life changed. Most people lose before they even start, because they don't understand what game they're playing. Let me repeat that because it's that important. Most people lose before they even start, because they don't understand what game they're playing. They think they're solving one problem, but the real problem is hiding underneath. They think they're facing one enemy, but the real enemy is behind the scenes. They think the issue is A, but the actual issue is A plus 6 other things they never took time to identify. And when you fight the wrong battle, you lose every time, even if you fight hard. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you're stressed about money. This is one of the most common stress points for people of all ages, and yet it's also one of the most poorly framed. Most people immediately jump into action. They pick up a side hustle, they work extra hours, they cut expenses, they panic, and they react. But here's the uncomfortable strategic reality. What if the real problem isn't money? What if the real problem is lack of structure, lack of direction, lack of prioritization, lack of clarity? What if you're not actually dealing with a financial problem, but a strategic problem? This is exactly why framing is so critical. Because the frame you choose determines the fight you engage in. If your frame is wrong, your strategy will be wrong. If your strategy is wrong, your outcome will be wrong. Let's go deeper with a pattern interrupt to reset your attention. Imagine trying to cook a 5-star meal without having any clue what meal you're making. No recipe, no idea, nothing. You'd be in the kitchen chopping onions for no reason, burning something accidentally, adding salt randomly, and then probably blaming the stove when it doesn't turn out right. That's exactly how most people navigate their lives. Burning onions with no recipe. They're in motion but not in direction. They're busy but not productive. They're working hard but not strategically. This is the cost of poor framing. Framing is what takes chaos and converts it into clarity. It's what takes fear and converts it into focus. It's what takes confusion and converts it into direction. So let's break down what framing actually is. Framing means defining the battlefield before you step foot on it. It means understanding the rules, the players, the terrain, the obstacles, and the real objective. When you frame correctly, you can immediately see what's actually happening, what's irrelevant, what's important, what's noise, what's signal, what needs action, what needs patience, what needs to be ignored entirely. Framing puts you back in control. And here's the good news. Framing is not complicated, but it does require honesty. It requires slowing down. It requires the discipline to resist the instinct to jump straight to solutions. Here are the 4 questions every strategist uses to frame a battlefield. What is actually happening? Not what you fear is happening. Not what you assume is happening. Not what your emotions are screaming is happening. But what is actually happening? This alone eliminates 50% of stress instantly. What do I truly want? Not what you think you should want. Not what other people expect you to want. Not what your ego wants. What do you truly want from this situation? When you clarify your desired outcome, your path becomes obvious. What is the real obstacle blocking me? This is where most people fail. They assume the obstacle is obvious. It almost never is. The obstacle is rarely the surface issue. The surface issue is usually just the symptom. If your relationship feels disconnected, maybe the real obstacle isn't communication, it's resentment. If you're failing to stick to your fitness goals, maybe the real obstacle isn't motivation, it's your environment. If you're not making progress in your career, maybe the real obstacle isn't skill, it's lack of direction. Strategists dig until they find the root. What is the best game plan to eliminate that obstacle? Once you've identified the real obstacle, the strategy becomes simple. But most people rush to this step way too early. They create strategies for the wrong problem, and then they wonder why they're stuck. Now, let's dig even deeper, because framing has layers. In every situation, there are 3 battlefields. The external battlefield. This is the surface-level challenge, the circumstance, the event, the thing you can see and identify. The internal battlefield. This is your emotions, your biases, your fears, your conditioning, your unconscious beliefs. The invisible battlefield. This is the part most people completely miss. It's the assumptions you're making, the rules you think exist, but actually don't. The limits you think you have but actually don't. The stories your brain tells you that you never question. Strategists frame all 3, external, internal, and invisible. Let me give you an example of each. External battlefield. My income hasn't increased in 2 years. Internal battlefield. I'm afraid I'm not good enough to ask for a raise. I don't know how to negotiate. I'm scared of hearing no. Invisible battlefield. I believe I need permission to advance. I assume I need more experience even though nobody said that. I think everyone else is doing better than me. If you only frame the external battlefield, you'll create a financial solution. If you also frame the internal battlefield, you'll create an emotional solution. If you frame the invisible battlefield, you'll create a strategic solution. And the strategic solution is the only one that lasts. Let's go a step further with another pattern interrupt. Have you ever seen someone repeatedly break their phone screen and then blame the phone instead of buying a case? That's what it looks like when people refuse to frame their problems. They go through the same stress again and again, but they refuse to examine their patterns, their blind spots, or their decisions. Framing shows you the case you should have bought years ago. Now, I want to introduce something deeper. Every problem has 2 frames. The frame you see, Bati, and the frame underneath. For example, someone says, "I'm overwhelmed." That's the surface frame. But the frame underneath might be, "I never learned how to prioritize," or "I say yes to too many things," or "I'm afraid to disappoint people." Once you uncover the real frame, the solution becomes simple. Here's a real-world example I've coached people through. A person says, "I'm always running late. I need to manage my time better." That's the frame they think they're dealing with. But when you dig deeper, you find the true frame. They underestimate how long tasks take. They avoid preparing ahead of time. They get distracted easily. They don't want to arrive early because waiting makes them anxious. Now you have 4 different strategic issues hidden inside what looks like one simple problem. This is why framing is so powerful. It reveals what your brain tries to hide. Because here's the truth. Your brain is a master at disguising problems, not to deceive you, but to protect you. Your brain doesn't want you confronting difficult truths. It doesn't want you taking risks. It doesn't want you entering discomfort. It doesn't want you thinking deeply. It wants safety. It wants predictability. It wants shortcuts. And that's exactly why you must train yourself to frame consciously. Let's go even deeper. One of the biggest problems people face is what I call frame confusion. Frame confusion happens when you think you're solving one issue, but the real issue is something else entirely. Here are a few examples. I'm stuck in life. Real frame. I haven't defined what direction I want to move toward. I'm unhappy at my job. Real frame. I outgrew my current role. I'm having relationship problems. Real frame. We have communication gaps that neither of us were trained to handle. I procrastinate too much. Real frame. I'm avoiding something I don't feel confident doing. Once you identify the correct frame, the next steps are obvious. And speaking of next steps, let me give you a tool that strategic thinkers use constantly: reframing. Reframing is the art of changing the meaning of the problem. For example, instead of "this challenge is overwhelming," the strategic reframe is "this challenge is teaching me what skills I need to master next." Instead of "I don't know what to do," the reframe is "I haven't gathered enough information yet." Instead of "I failed," the reframe is "I gathered data." Reframing doesn't deny reality. It shifts your relationship with reality. And once your relationship with reality changes, your strategy improves instantly. But reframing only works if your initial frame is correct. This brings me to the most important insight of this chapter. You cannot out-strategize a badly framed problem. You can be smart, driven, talented, and hardworking. But if your frame is wrong, you will always end up frustrated. Now, before we close this chapter, I want to introduce one more concept, the concept that leads directly into Chapter 3. There is one framing question that can completely reshape the way you see every challenge in your life. One question that strategic thinkers use almost instinctively. One question that shifts you out of panic and into power. One question that forces you to think like a future version of yourself, not the overwhelmed version you are right now. And that question? All right, now we're stepping into the part of strategic thinking that flips the entire game upside down. In chapters 1 and 2, we talked about the mind of a strategist and how to frame the battlefield before you run onto it like you're starring in an action movie without a script. But now, we're going deeper, because there's a question, a single, deceptively simple question that is powerful enough to rewire how you make decisions. A mental lever that can lift you out of confusion, fear, and emotional noise. I didn't come up with it. Life did, experience did. And once I learned it, it changed the way I approached every obstacle, every challenge, every moment of uncertainty. Here it is. What would future me want me to do right now? I know. At first glance, it feels too soft, too philosophical, too obvious. But don't underestimate it. This question is small on the outside, but it hits like a sledgehammer on the inside. Because the moment you ask it, something strange happens. You instantly step out of your emotional state and into your strategic state. It's like you jump from being the player to being the coach, from being stuck in the mud to hovering above the battlefield. Let's break down why this works so powerfully. Your brain is designed to protect you in the moment, not in the future. The moment something feels uncomfortable, uncertain, or threatening, your survival instincts snap into place. And survival instincts don't care about the long game. They don't care about growth. They don't care about becoming your best self. They care about getting rid of the discomfort now. That's why people grab junk food instead of cooking. It's why they procrastinate hard tasks until the anxiety is unbearable. It's why decisions made in panic usually make things worse. But when you ask, what would future me want me to do right now? You bypass that hardwiring. You trick your brain into shifting its perspective from fear to foresight. Suddenly, you're no longer focused on the immediate discomfort. You're thinking about the outcome. The strategist thinks from the outcome backward. The survival brain thinks from fear forward. The future self question forces your mind into the strategist mode. When something stressful happens, your perception shrinks. You zoom in too close. It's like pressing your face against a painting. You can't see the image, only the brush strokes. And those brush strokes look like chaos. But the moment you ask the future self question, you automatically pull back. You zoom out. You widen the frame. Suddenly, what felt like a mountain becomes something manageable, something you can work with, something you can break down and understand. This mental distance is crucial because emotional reactions are strongest when the problem feels close. When you zoom out, your emotions lose their power and your thinking regains its sharpness. Strategic thinking is mostly about perspective, and the future self question gives you that perspective instantly. Let's talk about fear for a moment. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. Fear of failing, fear of looking stupid, fear of making the wrong move, fear of losing what you already have. These fears are the biggest enemies of strategy because they make you act small. They make you take shortcuts. They make you settle for the path that feels safe instead of the one that leads to growth. But when you ask what your future self wants, fear becomes information instead of a barrier. Instead of thinking, I'm scared so I shouldn't do this, you start thinking, I'm scared because this matters. What would the future payoff be if I do it anyway? Fear turns from a wall into a compass. One of the biggest myths is that strategic thinkers are emotionless. Not true. They feel everything everyone else feels. They're just better at interpreting the emotion instead of reacting to it. Have you ever been stressed, angry, or overwhelmed, and then someone told you to calm down? And for some reason, that made everything 10 times worse. Yeah, that's because emotions can't be ignored. They can only be understood. When you ask the future self question, emotions stop being something you fight against and start being something you analyze. For example, I'm anxious. Why? Is it because I care about this outcome, or because I don't have enough information yet? I'm frustrated. Why? Is it because the strategy is wrong, or because I'm doing something out of alignment with my goals? I'm afraid. Why? Is this fear protecting me or limiting me? Strategists don't avoid emotions. They read them like signals. Let me throw in a quick pattern interrupt, because if your brain is anything like mine, it's starting to chew on these ideas and drift off into a rabbit hole of self-reflection. Have you ever opened the fridge even though you knew there was nothing in it and just stared inside like the answers to all your life problems were hidden behind the milk? You're not looking for food, you're looking for clarity. And trust me, it's not in the fridge. Clarity doesn't come from staring at a problem harder. It comes from zooming out of the moment long enough to see the bigger picture. All right, let's continue. Let's take a real situation. Let's say you're overwhelmed. Too many responsibilities, too many decisions, too many expectations. Your brain is screaming, and your instinct is to shut down or procrastinate. But ask the future self question, what would future me want me to do right now? The answer might be, they'd want you to break the task down. They'd want you to handle the most important thing first. They'd want you to rest properly so you can think clearly tomorrow. They'd want you to stop saying yes to everything. They'd want you to stop avoiding that one difficult but necessary conversation. They'd want you to stop trying to control everything. Suddenly, instead of feeling cornered, you feel guided. Instead of reacting, you're choosing. Instead of drowning in the moment, you're standing above it. And here's the thing. Your future self is always wiser, calmer, and more strategic than your present self. They're not dealing with your current emotions. They're living with the consequences. They see the bigger picture more clearly than you ever can in the moment. People always say, think long term, but nobody explains how to actually do it when you're stressed, tired, overwhelmed, or under pressure. It's nice advice, but in real life, the present moment screams louder than the future. That's why the future self question works so well. It makes long-term thinking practical. Instead of, I should plan better, you ask, what plan would benefit me the most in 6 months? Instead of, I should stop procrastinating, you ask, what action would future me be grateful I started today? Instead of, I should save money, you ask, what financial move would my future self thank me for? Long-term thinking becomes actionable. When you think like your future self, your priorities become painfully obvious. Suddenly, half the things you're stressed about, not important. Half the things you're chasing, not necessary. Half the things you're doing, not aligned. Your future self doesn't care about your short-term ego. They don't care who's judging you. They don't care about pleasing everyone. They don't care about appearances, convenience, or comfort. Your future self cares about your growth, your health, your freedom, your relationships, your wealth, your peace. When you start making decisions through that filter, the noise in your life starts to fade. What felt overwhelming becomes clear. What felt confusing becomes structured. You stop asking, what do I feel like doing? And start asking, what will get me where I want to go? Here's a truth that stings a little, but it's necessary. Most of the problems people face are problems created by their past selves. Procrastination, avoidance, emotional decisions, lack of planning, fear-based choices, instant gratification. Your present self is living inside the consequences of your past self's decisions, and your future self will have to live with the decisions you make today. Once you actually understand that, not just intellectually but emotionally, it changes the way you operate. You stop doing things your future self will have to apologize for. You stop making decisions that will cost you later. You stop setting traps for the person you're becoming. You start aligning yourself with the future you want. Now, here's the part most people avoid. You cannot cheat this question. You can lie to yourself about your feelings. You can lie to yourself about your habits. You can lie to yourself about your excuses, but you cannot lie to your future self. Because deep down, you already know the real answer. Your future self wants you to stop procrastinating. They want you to stop wasting energy on people who drain you. They want you to stop repeating the same patterns. They want you to start building the life you keep dreaming about. They want discipline. They want clarity. They want direction. They want strategy. And that honesty is exactly why this question works. Let me give you another pattern interrupt because your brain is absorbing a lot right now. Have you ever noticed that when you're late, every red light feels personal? As if the universe is sitting there saying, let's slow this person down for fun. It's not personal, it's your state of mind. Your mind creates the illusion. Your mind creates the urgency. Your mind creates the chaos, but your future self, they don't panic at red lights, they don't rush, they don't overreact, they don't crumble under pressure. They think, they observe, they choose. This is why you must learn, not someday, not eventually, but right now to think like your future self. Because when you do, everything changes. Every challenge, every mountain, roadblock, or opponent is sometimes obvious. A person, competitor, boss, or market force, and sometimes less so, a system or expectation. But the brutal truth is that most of the time the opponent is you. And this must be confronted strategically because you are both the general and the enemy on your battlefield, where your fears, habits, comfort zone, distractions, and self-doubt are the silent assassins sabotaging brilliant strategies by whispering, not now, wait, it's too hard. And if you ignore them, you will lose. Most people miss the distinction that survivalists fear the opponent, while strategists fear not understanding the opponent, causing them to panic and avoid challenges. Whereas strategists lean in deliberately to observe, gather intelligence, and map the threat, recognizing that the enemy is often internal, as illustrated by someone who thrives under pressure but crumbles under a minor inconvenience, revealing their sabotaging mindset and habits. Fear, therefore, is a tool because it highlights the enemy and shows your weaknesses, which strategic thinkers analyze and use instead of running from it. If you don't understand how you sabotage yourself, every plan, no matter how brilliant, will collapse due to your own human tendencies. Procrastination, avoiding uncomfortable decisions, or talking yourself out of bold moves, because the real battle happens internally, and unless you treat yourself like an opponent, studying your own tendencies, predicting your own responses, and anticipating your own sabotage, you will keep losing. The work begins by listing the top 3 things you do under stress, e.g., overthinking, escaping into distractions, or emotional shutdown, which are your internal opponents that, once identified, can be neutralized. Because strategic thinking involves reading yourself, a step most people avoid, focusing only on external tactics, which is why so many strategies fail when the internal opponent, patiently lulling you into safe but stuck habits, is unrecognized and unmanaged. To go deeper, identify your internal opponents by naming specific fears, failure, rejection, etc., examining invisible habits, checking the phone when stressed, recognizing that comfort zones are the enemy, assessing how often distractions win, and confronting self-doubt, which manifests as procrastination and perfectionism, thereby mapping your internal battlefield, the first step toward mastery. Once identified, strategize like a general, anticipate their moves, set traps, scheduling decision deadlines for overthinking, blocking apps for distractions, leverage fear as information, and use your environment to favor strategic behavior, because relying on willpower is a weak short-term solution. Understanding your internal opponent gives you a psychological edge that no external competition can match, allowing you to stop being reactive, become proactive, and gain control. Making external obstacles feel smaller and more manageable, and the fact that a successful person might crumble under a minor setback proves that their internal opponents are winning small, invisible battles. This is a turning point, because Chapter 4 reveals that the perfect plan is useless if the internal opponent, procrastination, fear, distraction, and doubt, remains hidden, silently sabotaging the strategy. Therefore, identify your top 3 internal opponents under stress and write down, how will I outsmart this opponent? E.g., overthinking, right arrow. Schedule a 15-minute decision window. Avoiding tough conversations, right arrow script key points and commit to sending them within 24 hours. Emotional shutdown, right arrow, use a physical cue. Walk away for 5 minutes, which is strategic thinking in practice, treating yourself like the opponent you need to understand, anticipate, and manage. Now that your mindset is grounded, your battlefield is framed, your future self perspective is active, and you've identified your internal opponents, it's time to get practical. It's time for the tools, the frameworks that transform strategy from theory into action. Because mindset and insight alone aren't enough. They'll get you far, yes, but without actionable tools, even the smartest thinker can freeze under pressure. Tools give structure, they give clarity, they give confidence. I'm giving you 4 core tools that, when used together, will make you faster, sharper, and far more confident in your decisions. These are the same types of frameworks used by CEOs, military strategists, elite athletes, and world-class negotiators. Let's start with the thinking framework that separates reactionary thinkers from true strategists. First-order versus second-order thinking. Most people operate at first-order thinking. They see a situation, think of the most obvious outcome, and act. That's it, immediate, surface-level thinking. Strategists, they think in layers. They consider second, third, fourth, and sometimes fifth-order consequences. They don't just react, they anticipate. First-order thought, I hate my job, I quit, I feel relief. Second-order thought, if I quit, how long until I find a new income source? Will my savings cover expenses? How will this affect my career trajectory? Third-order thought, if I can't find a job immediately, will I need to relocate? Will my long-term goals be delayed? See the difference? First-order thinking is instant gratification. Second-order thinking is lasting results. It's the difference between short-term comfort and long-term success. First-order thought, it's hard work. I might fail. I'll start later. Second-order thought, if I commit now, even small progress compounds. Over a year, this effort could generate income or even freedom I don't currently have. The discomfort today pays dividends tomorrow. Second-order thinking forces you to weigh actions against their ripple effects. It makes you proactive rather than reactive. It transforms "what should I do" into "what action will have the most lasting impact." Pro tip: make it a habit. Before every major decision, ask, what happens next and what happens after that? Keep pushing the consequences forward in your mind until you see a pattern. The second tool is the pre-mortem, and it is brutal, but brutally effective. Most planning happens in a linear way. You define the goal, you take steps, and you hope for the best. Strategists, however, plan for failure before it happens. The pre-mortem asks a simple but uncomfortable question. If this plan fails, what would the reason be? This forces your brain to anticipate threats and build safeguards before problems arise. Example: launching a project. Imagine you're starting a new business. Most people think, I'll just start, adjust along the way, and learn from mistakes. That's fine until the mistakes tank the project. The pre-mortem flips the script. If this fails, it's probably because I misjudged customer demand, didn't market enough, or ran out of cash. Now you can act before failure. Survey your audience, create a marketing plan, budget properly. Example: negotiating a deal. Pre-mortem question: if this negotiation fails, why? Potential answers: I didn't know their priorities. I overcommitted too early. I underestimated their leverage. Outcome: you go into the negotiation armed, calm, and prepared, dramatically increasing your chance of success. The key here is that the pre-mortem is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront risk, uncertainty, and failure before they strike. But that discomfort is the same discomfort that creates strategic clarity and foresight. Next up is the tool that keeps you focused on what actually matters: the power grid. This tool is deceptively simple, but almost no one uses it properly. It's a decision-making framework that categorizes tasks into 4 quadrants: urgent and important, crises, deadlines, emergencies. Not urgent, but important: long-term growth, learning, strategic planning. Urgent but not important: interruptions, minor distractions masquerading as crises. Not urgent and not important: time wasters, meaningless tasks, noise. Strategists live in quadrant 2, not urgent but important. This is where long-term results are built. This is where you plant seeds today that pay off months or years later. Pattern: interrupt. If everything in your life feels urgent, here's the truth: you're not busy, you're disorganized. Being busy does not equal being strategic. Most people confuse constant motion for progress. The power grid teaches you to prioritize with purpose, not panic. Example: Quadrant 1. Pay taxes before the deadline. Quadrant 2. Invest in skill building or network expansion. Quadrant 3. Answer a non-essential work email. Quadrant 4. Scroll social media for 30 minutes. Strategists minimize Quadrant 3 and 4 tasks and spend the majority of time in Quadrant 2. That's where exponential growth comes from. Finally, we arrive at the tool that prepares you for uncertainty: scenario mapping. Scenario mapping is mental time travel. You explore multiple futures so you're never blindsided. There are 3 primary scenarios to map. Best case: what does success look like? What steps lead you there? Likely case: what's the most probable outcome given current trends? Worst case: what could go wrong and how will you respond? Mapping these 3 scenarios forces you to think strategically across multiple possibilities. It reduces panic and eliminates surprise. Example: career decision. Best case: new role gives exposure, experience, and financial gain. Likely case: learning curve is steep but manageable, with moderate gains. Worst case: role misaligned with goals. Plan contingency such as upskilling or networking. By considering all 3, you prepare mentally and practically. Your confidence rises because uncertainty is no longer paralyzing. It's mapped. Example: financial investment. Best case: stock rises 30% over the year. Likely case: stock rises 5 to 10%. Worst case: stock drops 20%. Now you can make decisions with risk management in mind. You know your limits, your stop-loss points, and when to double down strategically. Now I know what you're thinking. These tools sound powerful, but how do I use them every day? How do I actually apply this stuff without overthinking? Here's the simple answer: layer them together. Morning planning, power grid plus scenario mapping. Identify Quadrant 2 tasks. Map best, likely, worst case outcomes for the day or week. Decision making. Before taking any significant action, ask, what are the ripple effects? What happens next and next after that? Before starting a big project, Premortem. Ask, if this fails, what would the reason be? Build safeguards before acting. Check-in. Identify moments where internal opponents interfered. Apply strategic adjustments for tomorrow. Using these tools consistently is like building a muscle. At first, it's deliberate and conscious. Eventually, it becomes instinctive strategic behavior. Here's a reality check. Most people never develop this toolkit. They rely on luck, emotion, or short-term intuition, and that's fine, until life throws a curveball. Without these frameworks, you're at the mercy of your own impulses, your environment, and random chance. With these frameworks, you create predictable outcomes even in chaos. That's the difference between reactive thinkers and strategic thinkers. This is where everything we've discussed so far becomes real. All the mindset work, the framing of the battlefield, the future self-perspective, the understanding of your internal opponents, and the strategic tools mean nothing if they don't show up in your everyday life. A strategic thinking isn't about grand gestures or brilliant moves, but about repeated micro-decisions and the small, consistent actions taken every day that compound into mastery, resilience, and results. Since strategists win by practicing strategy consistently, daily, without fail. To start the day, create the powerful habit of the 10-minute morning strategy review before checking emails or social media by asking 3 questions. What are the top 3 priorities today? Focus clarity from limitation. What obstacles might come up? Anticipate problems, distractions, emotional triggers. And how can I prepare for them? Plan responses in advance, which in 10 minutes maps the battlefield, checks internal opponents, and changes the trajectory of the entire day, moving you from reactive to proactive, from surviving to controlling, as demonstrated by pre-planning for a major project. Coupled with this is the simplest but most underrated habit, the 5-second pause before reacting emotionally, before that angry email, impulsive decision, or regrettable yes, to allow your thinking brain to take control back from the survival brain, giving you a micro moment to ask what your future self would want you to do, what aligns with long-term goals, and which response neutralizes the internal opponent. Just as important as the morning plan is the evening debrief, which turns every day into a training session by asking, what went well today? Reinforce patterns that work. What didn't go well? Confront failures without judgment. And what will I improve tomorrow? Turn insights into actionable improvements, creating a feedback loop for exponential growth. Most importantly, your environment must support your strategy, because willpower alone is unreliable. So strategically design environments by removing distractions, phones, notifications, setting up systems, reminders, structured workflows, and building routines, time blocking, batching tasks, as small adjustments create huge advantages. Finally, train the habit of perspective by forcing yourself to zoom out during stressful events, asking your future self question how this fits into the larger picture, and if the obstacle is truly a problem or just noise, which prevents small challenges from derailing momentum and maintains control, turning pressure into a tool. The Daily Strategist's Blueprint is the morning strategy review. Execute with awareness. Use the 5-second pause, environment design, evening debrief, and perspective habit, because consistency compounds into an unstoppable strategic mind. Most people drift through life reacting to crises, but you are ahead just by training differently, understanding that history is full of people who failed because they didn't make strategic thinking a habit. The hard truth is that strategic thinking doesn't make life easier, but it makes you stronger, smarter, and more resilient, equipping you to face challenges with clarity, discipline, and foresight, giving you control and turning obstacles into opportunities. You have learned the mindset, framing the battlefield, the future self-question, understanding your internal opponent, strategic tools, and daily execution habits, and the difference between someone who reacts to life and someone who strategically shapes their life is simply habit, the daily practice and relentless application of small strategic choices, which compounds into an extraordinary ability to navigate life's challenges, giving you the daily strategy practice that compounds into mastery and allowing you to meet challenges head-on, with precision, confidence, and control. And that is the art of strategic thinking,